Hey, it's Drybear. And the Season 3 demo for the First Descendant is out, and you get to play either Ultimate Freyna, Ultimate Bunny, or the new Descendant Nell. So what I thought I'd do today is do a kind of dive into Nell's abilities, show off what they do. I mean, we've seen some minor previews, especially on their like anniversary event, where they had that giant screen behind the presenters, and they just zoomed in on a screen with a camera, which loses all fidelity, and it was like impossible to see anything. So today, let's go through all of Nell's abilities and kind of talk about where I think she's going to land and give you some suggestions on where we could take her. Now, obviously, we don't have the full game yet, so we'll be able to test that out later, but at least we can kind of get a sense of what Nell can do and give you, get that brainstorming started on what you might want to use her for. But first, I'd like to thank today's video sponsor, Polybuzz, which is an AI app which allows you to create characters from your favorite games, TV, or even custom characters you've always wanted to talk to directly. Polybuzz has over 40 million downloads worldwide with over 20 million characters that you can talk to right now. And I suppose your next question is, what can I do with Polybuzz? Well, even though there are 20 million characters on Polybuzz right now, there are also First Descendant characters. So let's chat with Bunny to see what she's doing today. Sparks fly from Bunny's suit and strike the metal paneling next to you. Haha, sorry, sometimes I get a little too worked up. So I say, hey Bunny, I'm a huge fan. She grins widely, electricity crackling between her fingers. You're pretty smart. Most people only care about my past crimes or my speed. Want to see me run in circles around you? So we say I'm braced for impact. With a burst of electricity, Bunny launches forward in a blur, leaving trails of lightning in her wake. Wee! Try to keep up, slowpoke. She circles around you at impossible speeds, laughing. Of course, we say, I bet you can't go any faster, and her eyes sparkle with competitive fire, electricity intensifying around her body. Challenge accepted. Watch this. She channels more energy, creating a visible aura as she accelerates even further. Or maybe you want to chat with the ever-cold Queen Viessa. As you're walking into Albion for the first time, you hear behind you, who are you? What are you doing here? Viessa's voice echoes from behind the entry door to Albion, figures she'd be the first one to catch me. So we pipe up and say, I come in peace, I swear, Viessa. A scoff escapes her lips as she leans against the wall, her cold aura radiating through the corridor. Peace? That's rich coming from someone who just broke into Albion's security system. I'm supposed to be here. Here, look, at my ID badge. Viessa narrows her eyes, studying the badge with skepticism. That badge could be fake. The real question is why a stranger like you would need access to our facility. Download Polybuzz with my link down in the description and use my promo code Drybear. And thanks for helping to support the channel. So let's start by going over her kit, because I think there's a lot of really interesting subtleties to it that you probably miss on the first time around as you explore it. So her passive revolves around her being able to use the Aceve scan. So basically, I mean, she has the encrypted storage box, so she's basically another Enzo. We knew that already, so she'll be able to do that. So let's look at what this scan actually does. So we're in the demo here. We're going to run out and we're going to check out the mobs out here and look at what the Aceve scan actually does for us. So monsters are here, and let's go ahead and scan. So we scan. You'll notice that the ones that were directly in front of me got this purple mark on them, and the Demogorgon that was on the side did not. So this is what your Aceve scan means. When they have that purple mark on them, it means that they have the status Aceve scan on them. I really wish they would have given it a different name other than like literally the action that's applying it. Like the debuff has the same name as the Aceve scan action you're doing, which is a little confusing, but you have like these purple marks here, and there's going to be bonuses and benefits you get for being able to interact with mobs that have this marker on them. And what's also cool about these scan features, we come in here, is that you'll be able to target weak points on Colossi using the scan. So it actually, when you scan looking at something, it only marks the enemies that are directly in front of you. So when you have like an enemy like this that has multiple, right, you can actually mark. You notice that when I'm looking at a weak point on the Colossus, it turns purple. This plays into like Nell's weak point style gameplay, but basically you can aim the Aceve, and even on large targets, you can actually just mark specific weak points by looking at them. So I look at it and I'm able to look at it and I can mark it that way, or we have extra marks there. So see how I can mark a specific spot. So then we can go to like a pinpoint and do weak point damage while also getting value from that Aceve scan mark that we have on it as well, which is pretty cool. So that is a major part of Nell's gameplay, is being able to Aceve scan, pressing tab tab on PC or whatever the button is on console, so you'll have that target there. It makes sense as an intelligence officer. It's very thematic and themed for her, and it does give her a wide variety of benefits for scanning targets. So we have to start there because that's going to be kind of core to several other abilities, is being able to get this effect by using the Aceive scan to apply the debuff Aceive scan. By activating Aceive scan, you can mark them with the debuff Aceive scan, which gives you a whole bunch of benefits here. So the main one is going to be that when you hit targets with your first ability, you'll get some extra damage or some extra bonus from it, and you can even reduce cooldowns using that as well. So you basically, for her gameplay, want to constantly be using Aceive scan to apply Aceive scan so that you can actually get that debuff on them and gain benefits from it. Her first ability is a super basic projectile ability. It does have the projectile tag on it as well. This is just a barrage of breach shards. Her whole thing is like abyss and void. So with this one particularly, you will shoot 3 projectiles that shoot out and explode, and they have some pretty far travel distance and do some decent damage. They have a little bit of pierce as well, and they will explode an area on top of the target. However, if we go to her first ability, if you hit a target that has a Aceive scan debuff on them, you gain the additional effect at the bottom here, which is double damage on the explosion of the ability, as well as reducing the cooldown of your ultimate, your number 4, every time it deals damage to a target that's marked. It gives burst damage, even more damage. So when we have enemies out here, we want to make sure that we first scan them, then we can span our first ability, which lowers the cooldown on our ultimate. So let's activate the ultimate just because we have the ultimate active, and then we'll be able to use that. And then if we mark the targets, we deal double damage, have extra damage on top of that with burst damage like flat as a bonus, and we lower the cooldown on our ultimate, and we'll also extend the duration, but we'll get to that in a second. So if I shoot this here, you can see that each projectile does 55,000 damage per hit. If I scan them again, boom! Crazy damage because of that. So that's kind of core to her kit, is using that scan plus the first ability. And it's just very spammable. The build that they gave us here is actually maximum cooldown reduction, so setting 4.3%. There's no cooldown coming from the external components. And then there is cooldown on this as well. So you have cooldown on reactor and cooldown on max cooldown from mods, which means that this is kind of like close to as fast as you're going to be able to get it. You can get some other cooldown effects from like Braver Reset or something like that, but in general, it's going to have a little bit of a wind up as you're going through. So you're scanning and you're shooting your 1. Her next ability, I think, branches out into a different build, but basically her 2 and 3 are inextricably linked. They are kind of connected together, and they do some really cool things, and there's a lot of text to read through here. So let's talk about what these actually are. So her second ability is called Breach Link. You can activate it and then press it down, and it'll create this field, which you can expand to a pretty respectable range. I like the kind of the decal effects that are here. I do like these like void little VFX particle systems they have going on, but basically it creates this area on the ground that does several different things. Now, the first thing you'll notice about this field is it does small ticking damage. It actually, you can probably scale it up to do pretty decently, but any enemy standing in this area will take small ticking like dot field damage. While it's ticking, it's also applying both a mixture of debuffs on the target. The first one is a slow, so as it stacks up that debuff on the target, the enemies will become slower and slower, which is quite useful. It means you can put this down when you're doing like defense operations or point defense, and enemies walking through it will progressively get slower and slower, which is pretty useful. The next is that it marks the target, making them take increased weak point damage. So it will apply the debuff, slowing them down, doing small amounts of damage, but also increase the amount of weak point damage that you deal. And because it's a debuff on the target, it means that your allies should be able to benefit from it as well. You can only play the demo solo here, so we won't be able to test it, but theoretically, since it's a debuff on the enemy target, it should apply to anyone doing weak point damage to that target, so she's already a very strong contender for a group of, weapons platform style Descendants. It also counters the seasonal mechanic adaptive defense. If you don't know, when you go out here in Axiom Plains, adaptive defense is the seasonal mechanic in this zone, so enemies in this zone, it will react to elemental damage and then become resistant to it. Enemies inside this field will lose their adaptive defense or have it reduced, which is really nice. So I don't know how I feel about a Descendant countering specifically a seasonal mechanic, because it means when you're playing in other areas, that effect won't have any impact at all, but it is kind of nice and kind of fresh, at least as new characters come in, they counter that. So weak point increase, slows the enemies, does ticking damage. However, this is a really cool mechanic in that this field, as it builds up, does debuff and damage when you retrieve it for several different reasons. ones, the first one is just canceling it, it will explode and deal damage. So you can hit the ability again to cause it to explode. It does big amounts of damage when it explodes. However, there's a part of the ability that they don't explain very well, which is pretty cool, in that when you explode, you'll get a movement speed increase. You see that buff I just got? When you detonate your second ability, it increases your movement speed. So you actually get some pretty serious, like this is with, you know, no movement speed cores on this as well. Like we have fire rate, rounds. I don't know why they did versus truth on this, but that's there. You'll notice that this is without sprint speed cores. When I activate this, it's almost like a Nez where you just get crazy movement speed while that's up, and it has such a short cooldown that you can activate it, boom, goes on a short cooldown, and you can just maintain this movement speed, which is pretty cool. It also recovers a little bit of your shield as well, so if you're missing shield when you detonate this, you'll get it, and basically how much cooldown was left when you detonate it, you recover most of that cooldown. So you'll notice that like right now it's ticking for the duration, but when I activate it, based on when I detonate it, I get more or less cooldown back, which is what leads to this being a very short cooldown when you have max cooldown like we have right now. Next is Nell's third ability, which is a very conditional ability. This only activates when you have your 2 on the ground. So while Breach Link is on the ground, you will gain the ability to use Gravitic Reversal, and it's very straightforward. It's basically another variant of the Vortex effect that we have on Lepic and the Vortex effect that we used to have on Valby. Rest in peace, pour one out for my dead homies. So we've got this on the ground, and then while it's active, you can activate your third ability, which will suck enemies in and cause an explosion, but the AoE here is still on the ground, which is really nice. So you can cause this to explode, and it goes kaboom, and then you do a bunch of damage there, and it does trigger the retrieval, I believe, on the second ability as well. We'll have to test this more once it's actually out, but we have this on the ground. You can activate it, and it will suck enemies in and trigger a big explosion, which is really nice. So being able to group enemies for a character like this is incredibly powerful. And to be honest, there are people that run Lepic as literally just for his Vortex effect. Like if you look at some of the highest clears on Void Erosion, it's usually 3 damage dealers and a Lepic pulling everything in so that everything can be AoE'd effectively. So just having this Vortex in our kit already makes her a very viable choice, especially for group play. And the big kicker is her ultimate ability, her number 4, Gaze of the Abyss. So this one has a bunch of different interactions with her other abilities, but the primary thing to know about this is it is mostly a buff. It's a stim that you apply to yourself and your teammates. So at base, you activate Gaze of the Abyss. While it's active, you and your teammates will deal 35% bonus weak point damage, and this stacks with the weak point damage that you get from having the 2 active as well. So the stacking weak point damage incoming per stack up to 5 stacks, so 5 times 7 plus the extra 35% that we have here, which means that we get what, like 70% extra weak point damage increase on targets that you've marked with your 2, and if you have your ultimate active, which is pretty cool. Now, while you have the ultimate active, if you are able to land your 1 on targets that are currently scanned, like they have that purple triangle on them, you will be able to extend the duration of your ultimate and simultaneously lower the cooldown of your ultimate as well. So basically you have, since the ultimate is tech and your number 1 is tech, there's a pretty obvious skill build there, or a hybrid weapon build that you could run using tech non-attribute for Nell, where you focus on keeping her ultimate active and then spamming her 1 to lower its cooldown and extend its duration, though with enough cooldown, since this lasts 14 seconds and with max cooldown I have a 20-second duration, you may not really need to play around with extending the duration all that much, because realistically, if it lasts 14 seconds by default, you probably only need to hit a couple 1s in order to get it over 20 seconds, which is the cooldown, and then you have your maximum there, plus the fact that the 1 lowers the cooldown on the ultimate as well. But that's kind of the big thing there, is you're activating the ultimate, and then you're marking targets with a sieve, and then spamming the 1 to lower the cooldown, and also be able to extend the duration of your ultimate, giving you a large amount of weak point damage on the target, which is pretty strong. Now I'm gonna jump back to their anniversary stream. I hate to use this because the quality is so poor, but it does highlight the 2 Transcendent mods that they've already developed for Nell. The first one is going to be a Transcendent mod that turns her 2 and 3 into a friendly buff for weak point multipliers. So right now you have the debuff on the target from her number 2 that increases weak point damage incoming to the enemies that are debuffed, and she has a weak point multiplier of 35% while her 4, her ultimate, is active. However, they're going to add a Transcendent mod that makes her 2 and 3, the Vortex, a friendly buff that also adds more weak point multipliers. So it's possible she'll be able to add over 100% weak point multiplier to her and her teammates, which is quite good. The other Transcendent mod, which they show here, turns her ultimate into kind of like the dagger ultimate for Sharon. So right here on the back, I don't know why they decided to do the stream this way, but you see how it creates those shards? That's her ultimate. So it's a red mod that's doing that. So it actually creates this kind of projectile thing. It does seem like it functions a lot like Sharon's base ultimate, where she brings them up and shoots them forward, but as a way for her to create additional damage. And because it is tech, it means that it'll kind of give you a little bit, you know, her ultimate normally is a buff that grants weak point damage, which means it's more of a weapon-based build. So this red mod will allow her to be able to do more of a skill-based tech build. So again, there's going to be a tech build where you can do 1 and 4 and combine those together and get value out of that, which is pretty cool. So reviewing everything she provides, she has decent AoE coverage. I mean, she's not going to have the runaway potential of, say, a Contagion Freyna or like an Inez in general, because a lot of it is based in local area. She does have the ability to stack up enemies like Lepic, now being 2 characters in the game since we lost Valby as a Vortex options or as a, you know, like Whirlpool option to pull targets in. So she has that option there. But based on what we're seeing here in the demo, I mean, we could probably play around with other kits and other, you know, other modifications. It doesn't seem like she has crazy amounts of skill damage. It seems like a hybrid approach is probably going to be her best. However, it does seem like there will also be maybe 3 or 4 different build approaches you could take with Nell. So looking at this here, we across the board, her 1 is tech, her 2 and 3 are fusion, her ultimate, her 4 is tech, and her passive is tech. And so you're gonna have a couple different options here. There are about 3 that I'm seeing. I think you could probably run a fusion build, combining her 2 and her 3 together. Unfortunately, there's no like absolute 0 or something that's gonna be able to turn all of these into one type. And we also don't know if the red mods are gonna change the type, like ability type on these. Like it could be that, you know, one of the red mods turns her 2 and her 3 into tech or something, and that would give you an option to run full tech. But it seems like you'll have a skill build that uses the red mod that makes her ultimate into a skill damaging ability that stays tech, hopefully, and then you can run tech non-attribute power with her and combine her ultimate with her 1. And there's so much synergy between these as well. Once you can do the Sharon dagger, you can shoot that out, and then you'll just be able to spam and then spam, ultimate, and you got a decent amount of single target damage, and then you would probably just use the Vortex ability to group enemies up, then use your 1 and your 4 to deal damage to them with your skill power build. There's probably going to be another skill build that varies from that a little bit, which is going to use her 2 and her 3 for fusion. Now, you could do a hybrid build where you focus on primarily skill power, potentially skill crit as well. Like if we look at the default crit for her, skill power wise, like she has a crit rate of 5% and a crit damage of 1.3 with no extra modifiers on it. Generally, any character that has 5% or lower, like anything lower than like 15% skill crit rate is pretty hard to make work. You're going to find other abilities from other characters that might buff it up. We could potentially even run like a blue beetle to get a little more skill crit, but it doesn't seem like she's going to be a skill crit character just based on the default stats that she's rocking right now. So we'll probably just end up running with a build, either a tech build with the red mod that makes her ultimate deal damage, or a fusion build skill-wise that relies primarily on her 2 and 3, mixing in her 1 when she needs to, or potentially even getting some damage out of the ultimate, using the AC and the damage there. Now, the one thing that I feel like, which we'll talk about in the review section, is just she has a lot of animations that she's running through. They're very cool animations, but I feel like they're going to get kind of old by the 1000th time you do it. She's a little bit slower there, but that's going to be that there. However, what seems like her best build, at least based on what we've seen here in the demo, is going to be a hybrid weapons build, right? Which is going to rely a lot on weak point damage scaling up, doing, you know, firearm attack damage on top of that. Even the build they give us has shot focus on it, which gives us more firearm attack. And this also combines really well with the brand new external component set, which I don't think they even mentioned, which is shown on screen here. We actually see it in the demo right now. And that's going to be the ballistic trackers set. This thing is kind of nuts and feels like it's very much built for Nell, or at least having a Nell in your party. So the 2 set for ballistic tracker, which by the way has a max HP, max shield, max shield, max shield. So 3 max shields on these 3 pieces, and then the auxiliary power has max HP on it, which means you can play along with that. Keep in mind as well that her detonating her second ability does have a percentage-based shield recovery, so she probably will end up running some kind of shield build for defense, I would imagine. But the 2 set for this gives weak point damage 5%. Remember, she already has 70% increased weak point in her kit already, and this gives another 5% weak point, at least to her. But the big gamer here is going to be the 4 set bonus. So when you do a weak point attack with a firearm on a target, you hit their weak point. It grants 1 stack of a buff called Trajectory Analysis, up to 2 stacks for 10-second duration. When you attack an enemy, hitting a weak point with a firearm, at 2 stacks of this buff, it deals ricochet damage around the enemy, hitting up to 5 additional enemies. The ricochet damage deals damage equal to 8.5% of firearm damage, increasing in damage by 2.75% per ricochet for each of the enemies that it hits, which means that you hit weak point, you deal damage, you get stacks, and then you hit weak point again, and now your weak point is doing AoE damage based on hitting weak point, which means that she could use a sieve scan, you know, gathering enemies up, especially if like you put her 2 down, then you vortex, and then you weak point. It's going to explode doing ricochet and an AoE, and you can keep hitting weak point, keep hitting weak point. All of this comes to crescendo with the part of the ultimate that I didn't mention, which is while the ultimate is active, all firearm attacks from Nell target weak points. So increasing the weak point damage of herself and nearby allies is the buff, but while she has her ultimate active, she always hits weak point, and you can keep this up with basically permanent uptime, right? So if you do cooldown plus extra duration plus the cooldown recovery on the ultimate, you can make it so Nell is always doing weak point damage. Then you have increased weak point damage and increased weak point damage and increased weak point damage, and then you can even add in weak point damage to your weapons. So all of a sudden she's doing AoE from weak point, she's doing single target from weak point, she's triggering her abilities with weak point, she's granting her and other allies weak point, so she's just the weak point queen doing AoE at the same time. And this is kind of like a mini like thunder cage effect that you get when you shoot a target in the weak point, which you can guarantee with her ultimate, so you're always hitting weak points. So let's close out the video based on like a review for the character. Let's just kind of talk about where she sits and my vibes on her. The first thing that I want to talk about is just the animation bloat. This is kind of a problem that affects many of the characters in the First Descendant, and I think Nell is going to fall in that category, in that, you know, you have characters like Bunny that press 1 button, or maybe 2, like you press her 2 and her 3, and then you stop pressing skill buttons and you just run around, right? And so the animation debt, the time you're paying for the animations is almost nothing, right? You press those 2 abilities, every now and then you press her 3 again, but for the most part, you're just running around dealing damage. There's no opportunity cost being paid. There's no time being lost for doing animations, where on the other side of that, you have characters like Esiamo, who has to mine, detonate, mine, detonate, mine. Like he's just always paying animation costs, unless he's using his ultimate and running around, but for the most part, his kit is very animation heavy. We also currently have no way to modify animations. Arcade tuning doesn't do anything on that front. So characters live and die in a lot of cases by the amount of animations they have to use and pay in order to play their character, and I think Nell is going to be in that case, right? So she has to spam her 1 multiple times, kind of like Inez, so you have to kind of pay that animation cost. You have to do a very long animation on her 2, like her second ability has a very long animation on it, so you're using multiple animations on her 1, you're using this long animation on her 2. The animation on her 3 is not too super long, but it is in combination with the second ability as well, so put the 2 down, vortex them in, spam the 1, activate the ultimate, put the vortex down, or put the AoE down, vortex it, spam the 1, and like you're doing a lot of animation. So, you know, it could end up being fine, and they could definitely balance it based on that. But historically, Magnum has not been very good at managing opportunity costs. There's a lot of things that, you know, you pay a cost for something, but you don't get any benefit. A good example of this is Jaber. Jaber is not very mobile. He's very stationary. Everything he does is locked in an area. So you're paying the opportunity cost of not being mobile. And generally, when you pay the opportunity cost of not being mobile, you gain something for that. You gain outrageous damage fixed in an area, or you gain incredible utility fixed in an area, right? Where, yeah, I feel like a lot of the things in TFD have not been very mindful of opportunity costs. You're paying an opportunity cost, but you're not getting a benefit for it. So then why would you not just play the character that doesn't pay an opportunity cost, who just has those benefits anyway, right? Like, why would you not play Serena or play Inez or play Bunny or play Freyna or play Valby, who have very little opportunity cost? Some of those characters I mentioned have almost no opportunity cost, but they do more damage than the characters that have opportunity cost. So I think that's going to be one of the the marks against Nell that you have to kind of deal with as planning out her abilities is it does seem like there's going to be an above average payment that you're going to pay in the amount of time you spend committing to animations. The next thing is just around the skill damage in general. The build here is not optimal, but it's not bad either, right? Like you have maximum cooldown on this, you have a good amount of power on it, and you also have a reactor that's giving power as well. And I would say that in general, the damage output from her abilities feels like it's a little undertuned. Now it is the demo, they're doing a focus group, they're doing like an embargoed media version of the game prior to season 3. Like they're doing tons of different tests and experiments with season 3 before it comes out, which means they're probably, hopefully, gonna get a whole bunch of feedback on this demo, on the focus group, on the the media thing that they give out. Hopefully all of that comes back and say, hey, it feels like the skill damage on Nell is a little bit low. Could you maybe address it? And maybe since they have 2 weeks to go, they could do some number tweaking to get Nell's skill damage up a little bit more. It's just, it feels like, compared to, again, characters like Bunny or characters like Inez, they say Inez is the point of balance for skill descendants. It feels like her skill damage needs to come up a little bit to match with the output that Inez can actually do. Now, it could be that, there aren't like, you don't have the perfect weapons with the perfect rolls and the perfect weapon cores in the demo right now. So there's definitely, there's a lot more optimization you could make. It seems like that she's either going to be a weapon descendant or a hybrid weapon / skill descendant with a lot of really cool synergies. And honestly, she's kind of fits into that Enzo role, right? Where you're very glad to have an Enzo on your team. He's giving you ammo, he's giving you crit rate, he's giving you crazy buffs and bonuses. So like you see an Enzo and you're like, heck yeah, Enzo, let's go. And I think Nell's going to be the same way, especially if you have a build that coincides with her benefit. So she has a vortex like Lepic. She has weak point damage increase for people in the area. She can slow enemies in the area as well. She has all these utility aspects that make her really cool in a group setting, which is really fun, especially if you're plugging for like Colossi or Abyss or whatever. I think Nell's going to be really cool for that in general, but I do think that she comes with some downsides and some risks that hopefully, if we're being charitable, that Magnum will be able to sort out by the time the launch comes out. But that's my take on Nell, on her kit, where she sits, and what I think the builds are going to be once we actually get our hands on them and actually get to make our own builds and use our own resources for it. But let me know what you think about the demo and about Nell down below in the comments, and just what your expectations are for the new update coming very soon. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.